Alright guys, welcome back. Last time we were talking about the herpes viruses. We started doing all the DNA viruses. The herpes viruses have their own entire list of, you know, guys in there, starting from HSV1 all the way to HHV8. So there was a lot going on there too, and we were able to cover it all. So now what we're looking at is, I'm gonna go over a little bit more of the HSV guys that we talked about, all the herpes viruses, and then we'll go on to the rest of the DNA viruses. Oh man, yesterday I spent a day out with myself. I was just touring around New York City. Went to the city. Went to this amazing building. Now, if you haven't seen it, there's this building. It was newly constructed. It's called the Vessel. It looks amazing. I posted it on my Instagram too. Beautiful, beautiful building. Visited that, walked around, took pictures, and then I went across this thing called the High Line, which used to be a subway. It used to be like a train route, but the train was discontinued, so they changed the entire route into just a walking path. So you're literally walking through like the city. Went from one place to another place, got to a restaurant. It's called Chelsea Market. Beautiful spot, Chelsea Market. Ate a bunch of stuff there, and then I walked around a little more, just examining things. I found the Starbucks Reserve, and the Starbucks Reserve is this really cool spot, which it's like one of the original Starbucks that ever opened, and they have all this like really scientific looking ways of making coffee. And I got to try out all kinds of coffee. It was pretty crazy. I had so much coffee, I was a little nauseous when I finished, but I enjoyed it. I just needed a lot of water to recover from that. But yeah, it was a good day. Needed that because I was getting a little bored studying at home. So it's always nice to take some time off and just go exploring and whatnot. So now herpes viruses, it's when you get to viruses, just like when you got through all the gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria, that was a little easier, right? Knowing which bacteria is gram-positive, which one's gram-negative. It doesn't take too much because there aren't that many gram-positive bacteria, but there's a lot more gram-negative ones. So majority of them are gram-negative. When it comes to viruses, there's a little more, right? Because you have all your DNA viruses, that's fine. Then when you get into RNA viruses, some of them are positive, some of them are negative. And you really have to know all the little details, just like you needed to know catalase positive and all that stuff when you did bacteria. Here you need to know if they have an envelope and what kind of structure their nucleic acid is, right? So we already know all DNA viruses are double-stranded except Hepatitis, right? Hepatitis has a partially double strand, but the bigger thing is Parvo, right? Parvo is part of a virus, so it's literally just single-stranded, right? Otherwise, they're all double-stranded. Parvovirus is single-stranded. They're all linear, except Hepatitis is circular, HBV is circular, right? And then Papi and Poly, they're both circular. Papillomavirus for HPV, so HBV and HPV are both circular, and then Polyomavirus, which is your JC and BK, those guys are circular too. That's literally all there is for DNA viruses, and these are all your DNA viruses, all the HSV1 all the way down to HHV8, and your these guys, the Pox, Hepatitis, Adeno, Papilloma, Polyoma, and Parvovirus. Other than that, if it's not one of these guys, it's going to be an RNA virus, and when we get to the RNA viruses, we'll see how to figure out or how to remember if it's a positive or a negative strand RNA virus based off of the sketchy micro image recall. Right, so when we were doing the herpes viruses, we went through all of this stuff, HSV1, HSV2, we talked about their major differences, what they're prominent for. It was all discussed in the last video. Right, HHV3 is your VZV. Right, VZV is 3 letters, so that's HHV3. BAR has 4 letters, so that's HHV4. Right, cytomegalovirus is SIGHT, SIGHT, to remind you of AIDS retinitis, and the same SIGHT is 5 letters, so HHV8. 6 and 7 is just your roseola, which is a pediatric thing, and then HHV8 is the really big deal for HIV patients, and that's literally all there was for your herpes viruses. Now, continuing on today, the next one is your Poxvirus, right? Now, of course, all of these do have sketchy microimages. The Poxvirus one has a sketchy microimage with like boxes, so box for pox or something. But the sketchy microimage for Poxvirus was kind of unnecessary because there was like way too much going on in the image, but there really isn't that much you need to know for the virus itself, right? So just like majority of DNA viruses, it is double-stranded and it's linear, but it's the largest DNA virus, right? And just to make it a little easier to remember that it's the largest DNA virus, in the sketchy microimage, the boxes were part of this post office, right? And this is the largest post office in the world, which is easy to remember because post offices, they're a pretty big deal. They're pretty much international. It's all over the world. You're shipping things from like one country to another country overseas. So that's how you'll remember Poxvirus is one of the largest DNA viruses and largest virus in general as well, right? But largest DNA virus, just remember that. A majority has been eradicated. It causes smallpox, right? So largest DNA virus, but it causes smallpox. Eradicated worldwide by the use of live attenuated vaccines. So that's pretty much very rare to still find. And make sure you don't confuse this with chickenpox, right? Two different things. This is smallpox. You don't wanna call it chickenpox as well. Not the same exact thing for the most part. So just remember smallpox, right? Now smallpox, and then the other thing is cowpox, which are just milkmaid blisters, and I have seen questions on this, right? Milkmaid blisters. So I'm showing you right here the difference between them. You can find many images on like how they're different from each other just by googling it. So smallpox is just little, small raised lesions with dimples in the center. That's how they kind of describe it on Wikipedia if you Google it. This one over here, this image is your cowpox milkmaid blister. So it's a very similar kind of thing. You still have like a dimple in the middle and whatnot, but it's a little bigger. Right? These are a little bigger. They look like blisters. Two important things you need to know about Poxvirus. One over here, unique in that replication occurs completely in the cytosol via virally encoded enzymes, right? It does not go into the nucleus to replicate. If you go back to like, right up here, replicate in the nucleus, right? All DNA viruses, virus characteristics, all DNA viruses replicate in the nucleus except Pox, right? Poxvirus replicates in the cytosol via virally encoded enzymes. So its own large DNA has information to make the tools you would need for replication. Alright, so Poxvirus makes its own envelope using a DNA-dependent RNA polymerase. Note inclusion bodies at sites of viral replication. Alright, so if you get a histological image, you would see inclusion bodies. Those are not herpes virus inclusions, because a lot of herpes viruses have inclusions, right? We talked about some of them last time, what their inclusions look like. But here it's just going to be inclusion bodies where they're replicating. That's what's really happening. The last thing Poxvirus causes is known as molluscum contagiosum. Flesh-colored papule with central umbilication, and central umbilication or central dimpling or whatever is pretty much like a mainstay of all pox lesions, right? They have central umbilication, central blistering, central dimpling, whatever you want to call it. It's a Poxvirus thing. It's very rare to get a question on Poxvirus because it has mainly been eradicated. But if you do get a question, if you get the cowpox question, it'll generally have a patient that had some experience of milking cows or something, so that will be given in the question. Otherwise, they like asking about whether it's the largest DNA virus or any DNA virus that's replicating in the cytosol is a giveaway for Poxvirus. Alright. Hepatitis we're going to talk more about when we get to the hepatitis section, right? Because discussing all 5 of the hepatitis from A to E is a whole different topic. But Hepatitis is a DNA virus. It is a circular DNA virus, partially double-stranded, which you're always going to remember because HBV finishes this double strand after infecting a patient. Right? One of the things HBV does is that I think I talk about it right here. So the mature virion, which is known as a Dane particle, consists of a hexagonal protein capsid core covered with a lipid bilayer envelope with proteins and carbohydrates. Once transferred to the host nucleus, the viral DNA is repaired to form a fully double-stranded circular microchromosome for transcription. Right, so this partially double-stranded DNA is completed after the HBV enters the nucleus of its host. So you're always going to remember partially double-stranded for HBV, which is a hepatinovirus, and it's circular. Right, this hepatinovirus and poly and papi are the other two. These are the only 3 that are circular DNA viruses. Right, so it can cause acute or chronic hepatitis, not a retrovirus, but it does have reverse transcriptase, and this is something they like testing you on as well, right? But it uses reverse transcriptase to just finish the partially double-stranded DNA. That's really all that's going to happen there. Other than that, when we get to hepatitis, we'll talk about all the other things. HBV is usually related to sexual things, so people that are highly active on unsafe sex, they can contract hepatitis B. But this will be discussed in the hepatitis section. The next big guy here is adenovirus. Adenovirus is also a double-stranded linear DNA virus, but remember, the only ones that have envelopes were herpes, pox, and hepatna. Right? These are the only three that have yes. Everyone else is a no. Right? So herpes, pox, and hepatna were the only ones that had an envelope. You'll always, again, HBV stuff you have to remember all the time. You can't forget it. It can't be like a iffy thing. So you're always going to remember Hepatinovirus is HBV. Hepatitis B has an envelope. It has a partially double-stranded DNA that it completes when it's entering the host, and it's circular. Your Poxvirus, which is your largest DNA virus, obviously must have an envelope. It's huge, right? It's a special guy, and it's one of the special guys that also replicates in the cytosol. And then the herpes viruses all of them had an envelope as far as the test is concerned. Now, adenovirus doesn't have an envelope. It is naked. So remember, for sketchy images, the naked statue of David, this image is for adenovirus. The naked statue of David will always remind you of any virus that's naked. So adenovirus, double-stranded and linear, no envelope, causes febrile pharyngitis, sore throat, right? It's febrile pharyngitis, acute hemorrhagic cystitis, pneumonia, pink eye, conjunctivitis, gastroenteritis, and myocarditis, right? So it's a lot of stuff happening here. What makes it more special than some of the others is the acute hemorrhagic cystitis. That's pretty much a very strong giveaway for adenovirus. And then conjunctivitis with gastroenteritis, if you see that in the question, that's pretty much also a giveaway. Right, so let's look at the sketchy microimage first, and then we'll talk about more of adenovirus related topics. Right, so not too much happening in this image, but it does help you remember everything. Right, so naked statue of David for the naked virus, so you have him standing right there, right, the naked statue of David. And the blue hues are always nighttime for it being a DNA virus, right? Blue hues though. Not necessarily nighttime. You don't see a moon, but yes, it is blue. The image has got this blue background, just like when we did the herpes virus. You see it's daytime here, but you have your blue hues. So let me actually take that nighttime out. Blue hues. Just blue hues is the most important part. Yeah, it's blue. It's all blue. They have the blue theme going on. So the blue theme is usually for a DNA virus. Nighttime is going to be when we see RNA viruses. It's a negative RNA virus. That's nighttime. There's going to be a moon with a cloud in front of it, and it looks like a minus sign, so that's going to be the giveaway when we get there. So it's a DNA virus. It's got the blue hues, okay? The statue's penis is bleeding for hemorrhagic cystitis leading to hematuria. The red eyes of the bats deep in the cave are for viral conjunctivitis, right? So those 4 bats deep inside. Young children, military barracks, and public pools, such as the pool of blood that the child is in, are sources of infection, which is transmitted fecal-orally, depicted by the lion poop, right? So you can see all this poop all around over here. The lions with their mouth wide open are for pharyngitis, right? So you can see all these two right here with their loud, they're either roaring or yawning. It looks like they're yawning. Their mouth being open is just to depict the whole pharyngitis aspect. But better than that is the cave itself, right? The whole cave itself looks like a big open wide mouth, and there's like all this dripping inside. So that's pharyngitis. You have to remember it causes pharyngitis, and that's the easier thing to remember. But that is the most common presentation, right? So if you get a question related to maybe a bunch of young children going on some kind of camp, and then one just had pharyngitis, and then now they all have pharyngitis all of a sudden, you want to think of adenovirus, and you want to start treating it, right? And then this part right here, adeno live lions, right? Or it's actually called a den of live lions, adeno live lions. This is just to remind you there's live vaccination, right? Vaccination will always be depicted in most of the sketchy microimages if there is vaccination. So adenovirus does have a live vaccine, right? So live lions will always remind you of a live vaccine. And that's generally all you need to remember for adenovirus, nothing much. So pharyngitis and hemorrhagic cystitis, right? That's the big deal that you want to make sure you don't forget. And then we have a little UWorld question here that really ties in that concept of how you're going to see the question. So, during the course of a week at an overnight summer camp, 4 children ages 7 to 9 are sent to the camp health center. They each have fever, cough, congestion, sore throat, and red eyes, so pharyngitis and conjunctivitis. The physical exam shows bilateral conjunctival injection and an erythematous oropharynx. Auscultation of one child also reveals crackles in the lower lung field. So you're thinking now some sort of pneumonia is also happening. All the children recover over 7 days with supportive care, which usually is a giveaway that this is something viral and not bacterial. Which of the following caused the outbreak? And you would just pick adenovirus, right? Adenovirus will cause an outbreak amongst a bunch of children who are out on a camp. That's like the population you're thinking of when you think of adenovirus. And that's why you have a bunch of kids out here camping and, checking out this lion den or whatever. And the symptoms they gave in this question were pretty prominent too. Now, UR questions usually tend to give you a lot. NBME questions would have just been like, oh, a bunch of kids are out a bunch of kids are out on a camping trip, and over a week they all got pharyngitis and conjunctivitis. What could have caused it? That's all they'll tell you, right? Whereas in this question they told you a lot more, and they told you that the children recovered over 7 days. So viral things are where you generally tend to recover. Self treatment, just supportive care is all you really need there. So adenovirus, nothing crazy, not the worst thing, and really easy to work with. It's going to be an easy answer choice to pick. Papillomavirus, right? Papillomavirus, again, no envelope, double-stranded and circular, just like Polyomavirus, also no envelope, double-stranded and circular. Papillomavirus causes HPV-related symptoms, right? So HPV, now serotypes are very important here. So if you're working with the smaller numbers, 1, 2, 6, and 11, all you get are warts, right? Warts, and that's generally all that's going to happen there. CIN, not the most commonly tested topic. Cervical cancer, yes it is, right? Cervical cancer is a much bigger deal, most commonly with 16 and 18. Now, papilloma, and just like all DNA viruses except for pox, who actually replicates in the cytosol, papilloma replication occurs in the host nucleus. What it does is it inactivates P53 and RB, causing the cell to enter S phase for viral genome replication. Right, and this inactivation of P53 and retinoblastoma are going to lead to cervical cancer. Right, this is entirely discussed a lot more when we get to reproductive, and you look at this section right here of cervical pathology, right, dysplasia and carcinoma in situ. So here they tell you it's associated with HPV 16 and 18, which produce both something known as the E6 gene product, which inhibits TP53, and the E7 gene product, which inhibits phosphorylation of retinoblastoma. Right, so with those two gene products, 6 and 7, P and R, you end up inhibiting those two very important steps of managing cancer and preventing cancer, preventing moving into the S phase and just controlling the cell cycle. You mess that entire thing up, and that can lead to your CIN, which then can become invasive carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma of your cervix, and that's going to be problematic, right? So this is why we have a vaccination for HPV, and you should definitely get it, especially before engaging in any kind of sexual activity. So younger women are almost all going to have HPV vaccination in America, at least, because it's pretty much mandated, right? It's a very mandatory thing here, because you don't want to have cervical cancer, especially if it's a cancer you can avoid. Why would you risk it? So that's really all you need to know about papillomavirus. Polyomavirus is the one that has JC and BK. When I was first studying for step 1, I would just call JC the just chilling virus, because that's literally all you'll be doing if you have progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. You can't really do anything with that. You're not going to be working or having much of a life. So it causes PML in HIV patients. So you're just going to be chilling. You're just really not going to be able to do much. And BK is bad kidney, right? So BK is bad kidney. That's what I used when I was studying too. JC they call the junkie cerebrum, which is also fine. Right, so BK virus is a polyomavirus that affects patients who just got a kidney transplant. Right, it's a pretty big deal to get various infections after a transplant because you're immunosuppressed. So BK virus causes all kinds of kidney issues, and I think I talk about it right here. So JC is named after John Cunningham. Right, John Cunningham virus infects oligodendrocytes of immunocompromised patients You note altered mental status, motor deficits, limb and gait ataxia, visual symptoms, and seizures. BK, typically associated with patients who got a kidney transplant. Primary infections are respiratory infection or fever, then it disseminates to the kidney and urinary tract. May see ureteral stenosis and interstitial nephritis. Pretty much a giveaway with almost anything that causes kidney infections of this kind. Right, the last guy, pretty high yield, Parvovirus. Right, so Parvovirus is your B19. Right, so this is also non-enveloped, and Parvo is part of a virus. It's the only DNA virus that's single-stranded. So it's the smallest DNA virus because it's pretty much half the size of most others, right? Single-stranded. Single-stranded and linear. B19 virus, being the smallest DNA virus, it pretty much infects small kids, right? Infants for the most part. Aplastic crisis and sickle cell disease, right? This is definitely something that gets tested a lot. You know something called the slapped cheek rash in children, right? Erythema infectiosum or fifth disease. Many names for this. Fifth disease, erythema infectiosum, slapped cheek rash, whatever you want to call it. Most questions will probably describe it as just, a red rash around the cheeks. They won't call it slapped cheek or even fifth disease for that matter. Infects red blood cell precursors and endothelial cells. Right? Red blood cell destruction in fetus leads to hydrops fetalis and death. In adults, leads to pure red blood cell aplasia and rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. B19 virus replicates in erythrocyte precursors in the bone marrow by expressing blood group P antigen globicide, the cellular receptor for B19. Viral replication lyses red blood cells, so you would have that hemolytic anemia kind of thing going on. The rash that we have here from the slapped cheek rash, the rash then proceeds to a lacy rash over the trunk and extremities, right? So it will be all over the body. And these are just two pictures here that just show you the really red cheeks that you're noticing. And kids generally often, especially really white babies, do often tend to have very red cheeks. So don't immediately write off the fact that it might be B19 virus. You got to know more than just the red cheek. But if a question is just showing you the red cheeks and they want you to give a diagnosis, go right ahead and pick B19 because there's really no other answer choice that would make sense to pick for such an event. All right, so that's generally all your DNA viruses are. It's really easy stuff. It's really not that hard at all. Very straightforward viruses, very simple to understand the rashes they cause, what kind of population they affect, and their characteristics, right? It's far fewer characteristics than we had when we were doing bacteria, where you have your entire list of coagulase, catalase, the various antibiotic susceptibilities, bile, and all that stuff. And when I did those gram-positive and gram-negative videos, incorporating how sketchy makes you remember it was the really easy aspect of it. Right, so all DNA viruses are double-stranded except Parvo. And then, of course, Hepatitis was partially single-stranded, right? Only because you have to go ahead and do the... Oh God, it's summer and all these kids are out just having the time of their life. It's interesting when I'm studying here and I hear all these kids doing their thing and I'm just like, yeah, damn, I should have enjoyed being a kid a little longer than I actually did. Definitely should have been out yelling more often. What was that? Oh yeah, so viruses. All DNA viruses are double-stranded except Parvo and Hepatitis. Don't forget that. Hepatitis is just half a virus because HBV is going to complete its double strand after infecting a host. Parvo is single-stranded. It's the smallest DNA virus you have. All of them are linear except, again, Hepatitis, which is circular, and then Papilloma and Polyoma, which are circular and super coiled. They're very coiled up circular viruses. All of them are icosahedral except Pox, the biggest virus you have, is actually a little complex. And all of them replicate in the nucleus, again, except Pox, which is your biggest DNA virus. So it carries its own DNA-dependent RNA polymerase. Really easy to remember these details. It's not the worst thing. And when you see it in a question and when you try to answer a question related to DNA viruses, it'll be pretty straightforward. It'll be pretty easy. All right. The last thing they talk about later on, after discussing all the herpes viruses, is something related to stuff we looked at last time, which are your HSV identification. Right. So viral culture for skin or genitalia, CSF, PCR, or for herpes encephalitis. Right. So herpes encephalitis was your HSV1 thing. viral culture for skin or genitalia for HSV2, generally speaking, right? The Zank test is a smear of an opened skin vesicle to detect multinucleated giant cells, commonly seen in both HSV1 and HSV2, as well as varicella zoster virus, right? VZV, so that's HHV3. PCR of skin lesions is test of choice, right? PCR of skin lesions is test of choice. And Zank heavens, I do not have herpes, it's just a little way to remember Zank smear. Intranuclear eosinophilic Cowdrey A inclusions also seen in all three of them, HSV1, HSV2, and VZV. And we talked about it in the last time we did this, right? So we had these two images up here. So the blue one on the left is your impression cytology smear of a Pap stain showing the presence of multinucleated giant cells, right? So this will probably be someone with HSV2. This purple one here is a Zank smear from an oral ulcer base epithelial cells depicting a multinucleated giant cell. And you can find this in both HSV1 or HSV2, so seeing that doesn't really diagnose one over the other. And then over here, HHV3, which is your VZV, varicella zoster virus, this would also have some of these things that we just looked at. And then you saw the Cowdrey body thing. Let me see. I used to have an image of Cowdrey inclusions before too. I don't know why it's not here. 2018 Microbiology. Yeah. Oh, I guess it's really not special to catch. Alright, but if it's an eosinophilic, I'm going to put it here anyway because it's eosinophilic, and that's the little thing you need to keep in mind for Cowdrey. Alright, so Cowdrey type A is an eosinophilic thing. Right, the intranuclear eosinophilic inclusion. Intranuclear, that's another thing. It's in the nucleus. Right, it's very rare to find inclusions that are, all the way inside the nucleus. Most inclusions will be in the cytosol. So that's usually a giveaway anyway, even if the color isn't being given. If you have an inclusion that's in the nucleus, you want to think of HSV. But the other thing is it's eosinophilic, right? Eosinophilic Cowdrey A. That's in comparison to the basophilic inclusions, right? Basophilic inclusions of CMV. Right? CMV is also going to have nuclear inclusions, but you have to remember that it's basophilic when it comes to cytomegalovirus. It's not going to be basophilic. It's not going to be pink like it is over here. So that's your little comparison between the two. I mean, a lot more than just that will be given to you in a question anyway, so you don't have to base it just off of that. But it is a significant thing. They also list out receptors used by viruses, right? So the last receptor we just talked about was Parvovirus B19. The P antigen on red blood cells, we just talked about it. Right, we looked at it right here. B19 virus replicates in the red blood cell precursors in the bone marrow by expressing blood group P antigen globoside, the cellular receptor for B19. So Parvovirus starts with the P, and the P antigen is not that hard to remember. Right, HIV. When we get to HIV, you're gonna have to know all of these, and that's a really big one. That's actually pretty high yield to know those receptors of HIV. CMV uses integrins. Right, cytomegalovirus uses integrins, heparan sulfate, and even some others as its receptor. And those are the ones we've talked about so far. Right? We haven't talked about HIV, we haven't talked about rabies and rhinovirus. So those three are going to come up later on. They are not DNA viruses. Right? So now we're going to be looking at your RNA viruses. Now RNA viruses is a big deal. Right? RNA viruses is a little harder because you have to memorize positive versus negative. You have to remember the icosahedral versus helical. Right, two different shapes, and then of course, as far as the envelope is concerned, majority of them are enveloped. You see all the yeses. Majority of them are enveloped, as opposed to DNA viruses, where majority were not enveloped. Majority of these are enveloped. There's only 4 that do not have an envelope. So we'll talk about that as we go through this. Going back to the beginning of virology, they had a couple notes for your RNA viral genome, right? So all RNA viruses are single-stranded RNA, except Repeatovirus, which is Rioviridae. Riovirus is a double-stranded RNA. So that makes that very special. And then remembering positive versus negative is literally only easy through doing sketchy microimages. So I'm going to show you what I was talking about earlier. So if you look at these three images right here, right, these are three positive RNA viruses. So that's why you have the sun in all of them, and you can see how the sun has like the glimmer is making a plus sign. So you're gonna remember positive stranded RNA virus for all your sunny days, whereas your negative RNA viruses are going to be at nighttime, right? So you have your influenza, it's a negative RNA virus. So you have the moon with the cloud in front of it, and the cloud depicts what looks like pretty much a minus sign, right? As opposed to a sunny day with the positive sign from the sun's glimmer. So there's a lot to memorize just based off of that. Now, you don't have to know every single detail in the picture, because before step 1, by the time you're approaching step 1, you should know what each bug and virus causes, but remembering characteristics is the harder part, right? So just associate every picture with the bug just so you can remember the characteristics, not so much what it causes. What it causes is something you should already know as a physician who's about to take step 1 very soon. So if you haven't gotten to that point yet, you're really not ready for step 1, because you need to figure out what the bugs cause. Right, remembering characteristics is the harder part, and that's what Sketchy Micro should really be helping you with, remembering the various characteristics. Now, let's see, the first one, this was Epstein-Barr. This is, who is this? Yeah, I remember, because these guys have Pico babies, so it's Picornavirus, but let me see how big it is. Because Picornavirus is a really high yield one. Yeah, this is Picornavirus. If we look at Picornaviruses, right, so this is right here, Picornavirus. There's a bunch of viruses in Picornaviruses. It's like a classification. You have your Poliovirus, Echovirus, Rhinovirus, Coxsackie, which is a really high yield one, and then another hepatitis, your HAV, right, HAV virus. So Picornaviruses, if you look at the picture right here, they're all in this picture together, just chilling. Let's talk about them. So, Picornavirus, the Peak Orna Animal Nursery, right? So it's at a peak, which is why you have your mountains. This group has several viruses, and they're kind of just divided throughout the 3 different parts, the left, the middle, and the right. The peak reminds us that these are Picornaviruses. RNA viruses are shown by a warm yellow-orange background, while blue was for DNA viruses. The recurring theme for a positive RNA virus will be during the daytime, and a negative RNA will be for night. This is a daytime image, so it's a positive RNA. So all Picornaviruses are positive RNA viruses. These viruses are naked, and the recurring symbol for naked viruses has always been your Statue of David, which is right here. It is transmitted via the fecal-oral route, depicted by the piles of poop everywhere, right? That's always also another recurring theme. If you see poop, we saw this in bacteria as well, fecal-oral transmission, all right? Rhinovirus is the exception, though, which is transmitted by the respiratory route, right? So rhinovirus causes your common cold, so it's not really that hard to remember that it's going to be respiratory. They all replicate by using the host RNA polymerase, since positive RNA viruses are basically messenger RNA. A positive RNA strand is messenger RNA, so you can translate positive RNA viruses into protein directly. This is depicted by the coin standing machine on the bottom left, because a positive RNA are like mRNA, so it's the same currency, right? Same currency. You don't have a currency exchange. There's going to be another time with the negative RNA viruses where you're going to see a currency exchange, because negative RNA viruses are not like messenger RNA. And the machine is the ribosome. The viral RNA is translated to a long, non-functional polyprotein product, which is then made functional by cleavage by viral proteases, depicted by the long tickets being cut into smaller subunits right here. Right? So this is a little topic that gets discussed a lot. You can get a question about like some products that are being made by some viral infection, and then they did like gel electrophoresis of it, and they were really big. But then they did another gel electrophoresis of more products they got from the same viral infection later on, and they were smaller. So what happened? So, obviously all that could have possibly happened is that really big DNA was chopped into smaller, more functional units, and that's the functional stuff that was necessary by this virus. And when you see a bigger DNA thing, a bigger product, protein product, being cut into smaller protein products, and then the patient gets sick, you know that that was done by viral proteases. So you're just going to have to go ahead and give this patient something that can inhibit those viral proteases, and you can actually help. All positive RNA viruses replicate outside the nucleus, since the positive RNA is processed in the cytoplasm. And this positive RNA, compared to our own messenger RNA, will be very different, right? It's not going to have the G cap It's not going to have the poly A tail, etc. So that's another thing you can get a question on, right? Little topics like that where you can compare microbiology and biochemistry and just combine the two into a simple question. So you want to be ready for that. Members are depicted by the perch, right? And the perch is generally just, they have it in the book too. It's just a way to remember who everybody is. Perch. That's a poliovirus, Echovirus, Rhinovirus, Coxsackie, and Hepatitis A. The Hepatitis A hippos, let me go back up here. Hepatitis is always going to be a hippo. Hepatitis A hippos are on the left, right? So you have this guy. Later on, we're going to have zoomed in pictures of each one of these guys where we talk more about them specifically. Right, so hepatitis A is going to have its own thing. You can see he has an A band on him, right? So hepatitis A. Hippos are on the left. The aviary in the middle, the aviary is basically a bird cage, has your enteroviruses, and the right has a rhino for rhinoviruses. Each picorna also has a pico baby with it, right? So that can help you remember it's pico baby for Picornavirus. Think of them as exhibits A, B, and C. A for hepatitis A, B for birds, which are your enteroviruses, and C for your common cold rhinos, right? So A, B, and C. Hepatitis A. There are 5 main types of hepatitis, and hepatitis A virus is a picornavirus, and the hippo is wearing an A tag. The liver spot on its body is for hepatomegaly, right? So that's, and we're going to talk more about hepatitis A when we get there. The aviary has an enter-aviary, and the enter is for enteroviruses. Right, enter the aviary to go check out all the birds or whatever, but enter to remind you these are enteroviruses, so they're going to cause infections of the enteric system. The cockatoos are for Coxsackie A and B. The flamingos are for poliovirus. So you have your 2 cockatoos over here, you have your flamingos down here, and then the mockingbirds at the top that are all echoing each other are for echovirus. And mockingbirds do make a lot of noise. The aviary is shaped like a head because enteroviruses are the #1 cause of aseptic meningitis. #1 cause of aseptic meningitis. Right, so you can see this cage looks like a person's head, and aseptic always means that it's not bacterial meningitis, right? So it's viral meningitis, depicted by the red sign in front of the aviary, right? Aseptic. The bags of food depict CSF findings with normal sugar, no organisms because it's not bacterial, and elevated protein levels. And this is not something you have to memorize. This is obvious. This is very much common sense, right? Because if you had bacterial meningitis, then your CSF would have organisms, obviously, and they would be bacteria, right? So maybe Neisseria meningitidis. And those bacteria would eat the sugar, so you would have low sugar and normal protein, right? Here, protein is the only thing that's elevated because a virus is just that. Amino acids, nucleic acids. That's all a virus is. It's not living, so it's not an organism, and it doesn't require anything besides ATP for the most part, right? So no sugar is going to be needed and stuff like that. The child pointing a gun and wearing a space helmet, as always, space helmets for meningitis, right? The child pointing a gun and wearing a space helmet right here is our recurring symbol for meningitis. We saw this all the time when we did all the bacterial things that can cause meningitis. This is the first one that's non-bacterial, aseptic. The last thing, Exhibit C, your rhinovirus, is the primary cause of the common cold. One notable difference compared to the other Picornaviruses is just that it's via respiratory droplets. So the faces of these rhinos have mud on it, right? It's not going to be fecal oral for rhinovirus because it causes the common cold, not an enteric infection. So now we can start seeing each of them more uniquely, right? We're going to zoom into them pretty much. So these are your cockatoos, Coxsackie A and B. Right, so we're seeing the cockatoos now, the big white bird, and what Coxsackie A and B causes. Now you should remember Coxsackie is the C of A, B, C, D's of all the things that cause dilated cardiomyopathy, right? C was also Chagas, right? And C is also Coxsackie. Oh no, the enteroviruses, the real enteric ones are really just your the what do you call it? The Coxsackie, Echo, and Polio. That's it. Those are the only ones that are enteroviruses. Not Hep A. No, hepatitis A is not an enterovirus. The only enteroviruses are Coxsackie, Echo, and Polio, which is the 3 birds that you have. That's generally it. Okay, so that's why the enteric ones are the ones that are in the cage. So you're entering an aviary. Enter for entero, aviary, because that's what a bird cage is generally known as, right? Aviation, flying. So the birds are your enteric viruses. So polio being depicted by the flamingo, and there's a very good reason it's a flamingo, we're going to see later on. Coxsackie being your cockatoos, right? And then your echoing birds up here for Echovirus. So only the birds are your enteric viruses, not hepatitis or rhino. Rhino isn't an enteric virus either. So if we zoom in now, we can first look at the Coxsackie viruses for your cockatoos, right? So Coxsackie cockatoos, this is also inside the aviary like poliovirus. And the Pico baby reminds us that this is a Picornavirus, right? So you have your little baby there too. So Coxsackie is a Picornavirus. Picornaviruses are your positive RNA viruses, right? And these are not enveloped. That's another thing you want to remember, right? The first few are not enveloped. Picornavirus does not have an envelope. It's a naked virus, and you're going to remember that because you'll remember this general image of your section A, B, and C, and the Statue of David. So not, and you have your Statue of David here too again, right? Not envelope. Coxsackie is very high yield because of its relation to cardiomyopathy, right? Specifically dilated cardiomyopathy. So an answer choice on step 1 can, if they're feeling like a good mood today, the answer could just say Coxsackie or viral infection, or you can literally have a bunch of answer choices that are like negative RNA virus with no envelope, negative RNA virus with an envelope, blah blah, stuff like that. You would have to pick it's a positive negative RNA virus, right? It's a naked RNA virus. So what does Coxsackie cause? The sunny day and orange juice tell us it's a positive RNA virus. The Statue of David tells us it's a naked virus. The two cages are labeled A and B for the two different Coxsackie viruses that you have, Coxsackie A, Coxsackie B. The boy with the gun and helmet reminds us that enteroviruses are the #1 cause of aseptic meningitis. Cage A has David with red bird seeds in his mouth, on his hand, and on his foot, right? Red bird seeds. And the birds are eating out of his mouth. Some of them are eating off his hand. Some are eating off his foot, right? So that is to represent hand, foot, and mouth disease. Hand, foot, and mouth disease. The seeds are red to depict the red vesicular rash that hand, foot, and mouth disease causes. The patient may also develop herp angina, which presents with painful blisters in the mouth. The little girl in a bathing suit depicts summer, the season when Coxsackie infections are common. Right? So that's why she's wearing a bathing suit. So summer is when you're going to be picking Coxsackie answers, as opposed to winter, which is going to have a different answer choice. We'll see when we get there. But remember summer for Coxsackie. Cage B has bags of bird feed, and this is the one related to dilated cardiomyopathy. So A is for hand, foot, and mouth disease and herp angina, right? B is for your dilated cardiomyopathy. The floppy bags resemble a heart and depict dilated cardiomyopathy, a devastating consequence of Coxsackie B. The zookeeper grasping the cockatoo by its chest depicts devil's grip, which is also called Bornholm's disease, and pleurodenia, pain of the pleurum. It is characterized by extreme sharp pain in the lower chest and difficulty breathing. And this isn't really how you grab a bird either. You're never going to grab a bird like this, but of course this guy is well equipped and he has his thick gloves. But remembering this and remembering the relation to the heart will always come back to you. So if you have a patient with this crazy pain, right? I believe UWorld did have a question on Bornholm's disease, where a patient came in, they have this really, really tightening feeling of the chest, and it's not related to anything else. So they tell you like it's not an MI, ECG is normal, there's no elevation in like troponins or CKMB, any of that. So the patient is perfectly fine, but they also have a fever in that question, and that reminds you that there must be an infection, and you pick Coxsackie B. Right? So that's literally all Coxsackie is. So anytime you have a question on Coxsackie, you want to remember there's a Pico baby, so it's a Picornavirus. Picornaviruses are the #1 cause of aseptic meningitis. So you do have the kid with the helmet here again, right? And then on top of that, A and B have their own infections they cause, so you have that too. So that takes care of that. That's your cockatoo right there. Then you have your flamingos for polio, right? And that's a perfect bird for that too, because polio can cause that, asymmetric legs, asymmetric size of limbs, right? And flamingos tend to stand like this, so it kind of works out. It looks like the flamingo has polio. And this picture helps a lot too, because when I would be talking with students about poliovirus, and I needed to remind them of the anterior horn and whatnot. This was actually the reason I would remember it. This image also does a good job reminding you of the vaccinations that you have to know. So poliovirus, the flamingo breeding pool. Polio is a positive RNA virus, hence the orange hues and a sunny day once again. It's mostly eradicated, but not entirely eradicated like pox is. Mostly eradicated thanks to vaccination. You can see the Pico baby to remind you this is a Picornavirus, which should then further remind you that it's an enterovirus, the #1 cause of aseptic meningitis. The Statue of David on the right reminds us that this is a naked virus, just like the other enteroviruses and the rest of Picornaviruses. All enteroviruses are transmitted by the fecal-oral route, which requires resisting the acidic conditions of our stomach. This acid stability is depicted by the acidic pool, right? And they're standing in it, so they're perfectly okay. They're not dying in the acid, they're just chilling in between the acid. After entering the GI tract, because it is an enterovirus, the virus replicates in lymphoid tissue, like the tonsils and Peyer's patches, illustrated by the orange reeves and eggs in them. So this down here is kind of illustrating Peyer's patches, right? Lymphoid tissue. The sign in front tells us it takes 2 to 3 weeks, right? This sign, it tells you right here, breeding season 2 to 3 weeks. So breeding is taking 2 to 3 weeks. The replication is taking time. From there, it spreads to where it causes the most damage, the anterior horn of the lower motor neuron cell bodies, where it causes paralysis 2 to 3 weeks after injection. So once again, the 2 to 3 weeks has that repetition. The anterior horn is depicted by the black bird on the left with a huge anterior horn, right? Very rare. There really isn't a bird like this, right? So a bird with an anterior horn. This is the one that you want to remember, not the flamingo per se. You know the flamingo is representing polio. Symptoms include an asymmetric paralysis of the lower legs, myalgias, and decreased deep tendon reflexes. Ascending of this paralysis can reach the diaphragm. Flamingos often have asymmetric bending legs, which represents this. And her puff of air depicts respiratory insufficiency, right? So that you can see she's got her head down, she's having a little difficulty breathing. That's what's happening with the mother flamingo right there. Like the other enteroviruses, polio can cause aseptic meningitis, depicted by the boy holding a gun at the bottom, right? So he's here too. Just like the Statue of David is there, he's always there as well. We saw him with Coxsackie as well, and we'll see him with Echoviruses. The two vaccines are named after the scientists who invented them. Salk is the dead vaccine, depicted by the boy with the shirt that has a skull on it, right? This emo kid here. He's sulking, right? He's sulking. So sulk for Sabine, so sulk for Salk. That's your dead vaccine, so Salk. Whereas saving a life, this one works better. Him having the skull reminds you of the dead vaccine, but the name Salk might be a little harder to remember. But Sabine is a live attenuated oral vaccine depicted by the donation canister, saving a life, right? Life and saving, so saving for Sabine, a life for being alive. Sabine is your live vaccine, right? A lot of people often think Sabine ending in IN is the inactivated vaccine. It's not. Sabine is a live attenuated vaccine, right? Whereas Salk ending with the K is your killed vaccine. That's the inactivated one, right? The highlighted A tells us that it makes IgA, right? Because this is an enteric virus, so you want to think of IgA. You want to think of all the gut lumen lining, the respiratory lining, IgA. The downside of the killed vaccine is that since it bypasses the GI tract, it only forms IgG, but no IgA. The oral vaccine makes both IgG and IgA. So this is some immunology that you can get tested on. And it makes sense, right? Of course, the killed vaccine is not going to make IgG. It won't make IgM either because you never really got infected. It's killed. You have dead stuff in you. It's not going to really infect you. But you will have IgA because it's a foreign thing that's in your gut lining, so you can go ahead and make IgA against it. But the oral live vaccine is like actually being infected by a very, very weak version of it, so you will immediately make IgM and then later make IgG, so it's a stronger immune response. The only issue is that the live vaccine can get shed in feces and revert in active form into another person. Right, so it can spread. So you don't really want to cause something that can lead to spreading of polio. So that's why the killed vaccine is generally preferred. Right, so that's your polio virus right there. This is Coxsackie. Let me see. Did I have an image for echo? No, I didn't have an image for echoviruses because the echoing birds aren't that special. Your echovirus is really just going to be aseptic meningitis. That's literally all it causes. Right? So if you do get a question on a Picornavirus question, right, about aseptic meningitis, and all three of these answer choices are there, you pick echovirus. Echovirus, the way you remember it causes aseptic meningitis. If you ever had a pet bird at home, you know that these birds make a lot of noise, and sometimes very early in the morning. So they do cause a headache, right? And that's supposed to help you remember the aseptic meningitis. If you've never had a bird, then just imagine like being in this cage where all these birds are just yelling like crazy. Like, you are gonna have a headache. So that's really all you want to do. But for the most part, polio and Coxsackie had their own things that are more high yield for those questions, right? Coxsackie is going to be usually related to dilated cardiomyopathy. Otherwise, they can ask you about the herpangina or the hand-foot-mouth disease or the devil's grip. And poliovirus is almost entirely going to be a question about the vaccination or their replication in your lymphoid tissue or the anterior horn. And then echovirus can only be about one thing, and that's your aseptic meningitis. All right. So normal sugar, no organisms, high protein because high nucleic acids. That's it. Right. Whereas if you have bacterial meningitis, the bacteria are organisms. You're going to have low sugar because the bacteria are eating it, and protein will be normal. Protein could be a little elevated, but not really. It's not going to be significantly elevated at all. So that was all your Picornaviruses that we really care about. Hepatitis viruses I'm going to do an entire separate thing on because they are spread out. Not one group has all the hepatitis viruses. We saw Hepatitis, which was your partially double-stranded circular DNA virus, right? And that was HBV. We just saw HAV, which is a Picornavirus. So it's going to have its Pico baby. And that's your naked single-stranded RNA virus, right? All RNA viruses are single-stranded anyway. The only one that's double-stranded is Rio. And then later on, we're also going to see the rest of them. For example, Hep E is a very easy name, Hepivirus for hepatitis E. This is another one very much just like your hepatitis A. A and E are both positive, naked RNA viruses. HCV is not naked, right? Hepatitis C is a flavivirus. This is enveloped, but it's also a positive RNA virus. So A, C, and E are all RNA viruses. The hepatitis B is it's a DNA virus, whereas when you get to hepatitis D, that's a negative RNA virus, right? And it's negative because hepatitis D is deficient anyway, right? So that's easy to remember like that. So those guys are not that hard to remember in that manner. We just finished the Picornaviruses. In the next video, I'll start going into the flaviviruses. That's another group of multiple viruses that you can get very discrete questions on, and they can seem confusing if you haven't actually either experienced the question or studied it. So I'll catch you guys again later on when I finish the rest of your RNA viruses in the next video.